Welcome to the Transmission Coaching Podcast, powered by ATRA. Today's podcast is sponsored by Gears Magazine, your magazine for the automatic transmission rebuilding industry. Be sure to get into Gears. Get your free subscription at gearsmagazine.com. Click on subscribe. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the Coaching Podcast. And now here's your host, Coach Lance Wiggins.
Welcome to the Transmission Coaching Podcast. My name is Lance Wiggins. It's a great day to fix transmissions. And with me today, of course, is my lovely co-host, Miss Vanessa. Hello.
Lovely. Hey, Lance.
How was 4th of July, man? You guys went vacation this time, right?
I've got a little story if we have some time.
Sure, go for it.
So 4th of July was on Wednesday. I took Thursday and Friday off. Every year we book a campsite at one of our state beaches here in California. So some of you who don't know, it's a big production to get to reserve sites these days. 6 months out, you wake up at whatever time, you reserve your site. They're sold out for the month within 15 minutes. It's like concert tickets. I mean, it's like a big deal. So anyway, so every year, January 2nd, there I am booking our site for July. So we're excited, needless to say. One time of the year that we go, kids have a great time, about 4 days. Anyway, about a week ago, we were seeing warnings about heat waves coming through California.
Yeah, we had a slight heat wave. These temps were triple digits in places that just don't see that. And so, but we were like, we're going to be at the beach. We'll be fine. Like, we'll get a nice breeze. Yeah, it'll be warm, but it'll still be enjoyable. Unlike Florida, which is 107 on the beach, that doesn't happen in California.
No, are you kidding me? Like, mid 70s, mid to high 70s,
usually, yeah.
and that's a warm day at the beach, 80s, right? It kept saying it was going to be 102 at the beach, and I'm like, this is no, I don't believe it. Well, there we are. Thursday, Friday. Half the campsite is like completely gone. People took off. They're like, no, we're not doing this. It literally is 108.
Oh my goodness.
At the beach. Had to leave early.
Was it windy?
And then there was windy. Then there was a fire 5 miles away. So we were told, yes, exactly. So we were told we couldn't use the charcoal fires or anything like that. So there we are. Just there not being able to cook food. Anyway, we had to leave a whole day and a half early. I was not happy. So, yes, that was my 4th of July weekend.
Outstanding. Sounds like fun. We had 117 on Friday. 117 degrees with a
it's barely cooling down.
With a 10-mile-an-hour wind, and it was ugly. It was ugly. Gosh. Hey, let's see. Was it Monday? I guess it was Monday. Where there was a phone call that came into the office, and I found this very interesting. I know most of our listeners may know, maybe they don't, about the tariff that was pushed on July 6th. And the call came in from a supplier, and it went something like, where do you guys stand on this, and what do you know about it? And this reminded me of the Right to Repair Act some years ago, back in 2007, 2008, when it went to Congress, and we had people calling us, well, what do you know about the Right to Repair Act? And at the time, I was like, not really a lot, but let's find out about it. And then we ended up going to Washington and ended up battling for the Right to Repair Act to get that passed. And so I did a quick search for online articles, found a ton of articles on this. And even though, the government aspect isn't my forte, I felt it intriguing enough to bring this to the podcast today and how it's affecting.
We just had that conversation.
Right, affecting our suppliers and how it might also be affecting our shops as we start trickle down.
That trickle down effect. I was going to say.
Now you start to have effect. Yeah, right. And as we get that trickle down, how that's happening, how that's going to affect the customer. You and I mean, when we go into a shop. And so on July 6th, there was a $34 billion worth of Chinese good tariff that went into effect at midnight on Friday and turned, and so, of course, the Chinese government kicked off a trade war. The administration said that it was necessary to protect the national security and the intellectual property of the U.S. businesses. In addition, repeatedly expressed the desire to shrink the U.S. trade deficit with China to protect American business and being undercut by Chinese producers. Interestingly enough, as soon as I started reading this, I recalled in 1992, right in that area, I had went back to Michigan to the Ford plant for training, and at the time, my first wife, Holly, her dad Jack, worked for Ford, and he was the AXODE front-wheel drive transmission pan producer. They produced the pans. They got the metal, they poured the metal in there, plank, and off it went. And it went to go, hey, Dennis.
Come on in.
What are you doing? You out there walking around?
He's checking up on us.
I know. And so, so I went through the whole tour, went through the pan tour, went through the framing area tour, went through one of the engine tours, and I was just bewildered on how awesome this was.
How big was that facility?
Huge, miles long, miles. And when I mean miles, I mean miles. Like, it's
its own city.
It's like Point Magoo. It's like going to Point Magoo. It's like going to Port Hueneme. It's like going to a naval base. That's essentially, everything's gated around there. You have to gate in, gate out. It's miles, 5 square miles, something like that. And there's, in all of these buildings, thousands and thousands and thousands of people are working here. And it was shortly after that, probably 5, 6, 7 years after that plant that was building the pans, the aluminum pans for transmissions, they stopped production. And they stopped production because they were getting the pans cheaper someplace else, whether it was in Mexico or Canada or overseas. Parts started coming, and everybody who's been in the business knows this. Like, you look at any part that we get, it says made in Mexico, made in Canada, made in China, made in Taiwan, made here. Very few parts that we have for any transmission area, unless it's made here directly in the U.S. from the OE or from the aftermarket. You just won't see that, And so it kind of triggered some memory. I remember listening to him saying that they're closing down the plant. They didn't know how long it was going to be closed down, and to this date, I believe, if I'm not wrong here, that Michigan, the state of Michigan, is still the poorest state in the 50, right? So that's bad.
Yeah.
Like, that's and it was perceived as because we took our money elsewhere, this is why this happened. And so, it drummed up some pretty interesting conversations now.
And some personal memories.
With other people that I've kind of just, hey, nonchalantly, hey, what do you think about this tariff and what's going on? I don't follow CNN or CSNBC or any of the news channels very often, but I know that and I believe it was Inside Trader or one of the articles, Inside Business, something like that.com, that I read last night, that had a very good description of it, and then the understanding of it, and as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, gosh, Tuesday we had a conversation with another supplier who mentioned that he used to pay 2% in tariff and is now paying 28%. Well, that's huge. That's huge.
Big deal.
And
overnight. Obviously.
And I believe one of our torque converter suppliers mentioned that he had paid $17,000 in aluminum that was being shipped over, and then, oh, by the way, we've got it here for you, but if you want it, it's $4,500. Like, here's your tax on top of the price. So so I found it interesting that because from the technical perspective, we are always just only dealing with that particular problem with your vehicle. But now I think there's a bigger problem. I think our suppliers might be affected by this faster, and I mean, obviously the profit margin is going to change,
or they get to pass it on to the customer
or the shop.
The shop, basically their customer. Yeah.
It says, and so I know that Vanessa and I probably did this. Well, I'm sure we did the same thing. Government 101 was back in high school. For me, it was 88.
Yeah,
as
it was
a senior.
Requirement, not out of a hobby.
Yeah, and tariff, but you don't know tariff. The definition, right? We were chatting about the word effect or effect, here earlier. So, but it said a tariff, in plain terms, is a tax on goods coming into our country. So that that makes sense. Like, okay, well, if they've got a $200 million tariff, against us, or they're billing against, they're taxing us $200 million. Basically. Why can't we tax them? The same thing, right? Well, if companies can get an opportunity to purchase a part for less, for more profit, that's simple. That's simple math.
You're gonna do it,
right?
Yeah.
That's simple math. Also mentioned something about the idea of the tariff was to push the price of foreign goods to make the U.S.-made option more attractive. Which now, going back in memory, seeing the plant in Detroit, right? At the time, how much does it cost to put a dipstick in a transmission? When the dipsticks left the transmissions, everybody was like, "How come there's no dipstick? How can you tell the difference?" Well, you're talking about 30 cents, 40 cents, 50 cents on 6 million vehicles,
Adds up.
right? And so if the demand is there for the dipstick to be there, and I can get that price for pennies on the dollar someplace else, then the result is, Michigan and Ford plants kind of go out of business because there's no, there's no option for it. So, one of the things that it also mentioned was that there's an attempt to get companies to use less Chinese-produced goods and opt for items made in the U.S. or another import from a more friendly trade ally. And I think that, again, if you go to Ford or General Motors or Chrysler or any one of the manufacturers that are, quote, domestic, you purchase a part, you get the box says on it made in someplace. It used to be made in Michigan, USA, made in USA. Then you started seeing the change to made in Mexico, made in Canada. Then you saw the change to, made in some other countries. That might give some of our neighboring countries an opportunity.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping, in essence, that it also gives us an opportunity as well.
Our domestic manufacturers.
That's right, our domestic manufacturers. So, what do you think that's going to mean to our businesses? I mean.
Yeah. So as with anything, the trickle down effect is always in place, where sometimes these extra fees and taxes end up just being passed on to the customer, which in this case would be a shop, like you said. I could see how it could benefit, like I said, the domestic manufacturers. I mean, how many of those do we have even left? If a lot of them packed up and had to close shop, like you just said about Detroit. So, I'm not quite sure, but luckily we've got someone who just walked in who knows a lot more.
He's not doing it. He's staying out of this. He's staying out of this conversation. Well, it's good in a sense because it allows us to continue to go with the product. But are you sure you don't want to come in?
He's shooing us away.
Okay. All right.
Uh-oh.
No, you're fine. What's that?
We're gonna get a talking to later.
What are you doing? No, he's bringing you right to the party.
All right.
Right to the party. We're not messing around. We love this aspect. We love having Dennis in here.
Why not?
Dropping the knowledge.
He always drops the knowledge. He brings on the good
Just
stuff.
got to keep you guys in check.
Oh no, that's what I was afraid of. We were doing great, and then
How do you
No,
know?
you're doing a great job.
And how do you know? Well, Vanessa and I were talking about this.
this is going to be a learning podcast.
It was actually a learning lesson in government, orders or in tariffs in general, because here we are sitting here, talking about how this has affected some of our businesses, some of our shops, some of our suppliers have actually called us, contacted us, asked us what's going on, and it's drummed up this interest in what is this going to do to our suppliers? What is this going to do to the end in mind? We think that as far as what we're seeing is hopefully this brings the U.S. companies back on track, maybe, and
Hopefully, it does what it's meant to do, of course. But we won't know.
Well, it should, but you never know. I mean, this is going to be a long-term effect, and how it's portrayed to the public is going to matter too. It's kind of interesting. For the longest time, the U.S. has been thought of as being in second place to China in manufacturing, but when you consider a per capita in the number of people in the U.S. versus the number of people in China, we were number one until maybe just a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
They just barely squeaked by.
Mm-hmm.
And people are under the impression that manufacturing is gone in the U.S., and it's not necessarily the case, but it has been terribly strained. I mean, I visited Detroit, not just at the airport going to a hotel, but in a car driving around, and there are areas that you can tell 50 years ago it was a glowing example of industrial might,
right,
and they're abandoned.
and it's interesting because one of my buddies that I chat with frequently enough is that he works offshore. He works on an Exxon platform, and there are endless oil platforms up and down the coast of California. And one of the things is that we had you get an oil leak, and next thing you know, the EPA is out there, and everybody's raising their hands like, get rid of these guys, get rid of this, stop this. Well, there's about 300 or so Exxon platforms, or 300 or so platforms, and some of them are Exxon. He's on one of them. There's 5 people on it. It doesn't operate at all, and that's a norm. The majority of the platforms that are out there off the coast of California are just barren, and his purpose there is to maintain the platform, to make sure that the generators are working, to make sure, but not to pump oil, not to pump any crude out, not to do anything. And you get to thinking, well, geez, if we're pumping our own oil instead of extracting it from someplace else, wouldn't that be better, right? Is that similar to the same thing that what's going on here? I mean, isn't it similar? Like, if we're building our own product and we're selling it to ourselves, that's a good thing.
That would be better,
right?
The thought that comes to mind is, and I've heard this discussion or this point many times, is how kiosks and ATMs have displaced human workers.
Oh, yeah.
And you can get some people, some people get really riled up over that.
Sure.
And yet there may not be any thought whatsoever about all the displaced workers as these jobs have gone out of the country. As we're waltzing into Walmart to buy a 60-inch flat screen TV for $800.
Right.
There's some of the things, the behind the scenes aspects of this we don't even know about. Mm-hmm. We can guess in some instances, but it's a really complex issue, and it's very it can be very emotionally charged.
Sure. Yeah, that's that. I think that the the supplier that contacted us on Monday, he was emotional about it. He was in uproar, like, look, I just, I was getting 2%, I was paying 2%, now I'm paying 28%. What's next? How am I supposed to do business this way now? And it's funny because I can relate it to, in some fashion of my melon is gas prices. Gas prices were $1. They're $1 for a very long time in my life, $1.50 at the most. And then all of a sudden gas prices went up, and then all of a sudden you get a 50-cent raise during the summer, and they say, well, it's because it's hot, it's because we're shutting down some plants, it's because we're doing this, it's because we're doing this, and then the wintertime all of a sudden it creeps back down, but only creeps down 20%,
right.
Not 50, not the 50 that they raised, it is the 20%, and then they raise it 30%, so they raise it 10% more, and then they creep it down to 10%. So next thing you know, in California you're paying $3.89.
Well, meanwhile, on your way home, you drive past dozens of oil rigs pumping oil out of the ground. You're wondering, how can it be so expensive right here?
Right, exactly, right here, and yeah. And so it's kind of one of those things that, the tariff is enacted. The price of goods are now higher because of this, and it may just become the norm, right? Until there's some sort of
balance.
Yeah, so until there's some sort of equality between the two countries, I believe.
And obviously, it's just not going to happen overnight. So, as far as these domestic manufacturers being able to step in and.
Well, I think for us specifically, it's a parts issue all day long. Like the majority of our parts that we put on vehicles aren't made here, for the most part, whether they're in North America or overseas. But the components to make the part here now that you're purchasing, if you're purchasing aluminum from another country to be shipped over here, and now you're having to pay, like one of our suppliers said, an extra $4,500 just to get the container off the ship. That's rough, man.
That hurts, and that's real.
Yeah.
And that's real. Passing on that cost to the customers in the form of higher prices, cut costs in other areas like workforces or shift operations outside the U.S. to avoid tariffs altogether. That's another effect of the taxes, essentially, right? I mean, like oh geez, well, if the cost of getting this product is X amount, and I've got to create this many widgets, and I only have this many hours in it, and it's going to cost me this much. Well, sorry, Vanessa.
This is the price.
Gotta let you go. You got 6 hours a day. That's it. That's a bad thing too, right? I mean, that you end up cutting costs on all avenues of the product. What do you think this is going to, affect 6 months from now? I mean, how do you think this is? Do you think this is going to affect our expo as far as suppliers go? Do you think this is going to affect their, obviously something's going to happen with how they do business if in fact they purchase parts from overseas. If they don't, it doesn't.
Yeah.
I think it's too early to know.
More research involved. Ding, 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 ding.
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily research. It depends on the reaction and of the people involved.
From the purchase.
That's correct.
Sure, that would make sense.
This goes back to the same odd observation that we've had for years and years about how you'll go into any town and there's a shop that's doing really well, and right down the street there's one that's almost out of business. And I think what we've learned is a good reason, not a good reason. One of the reasons is the attitude of the shop owner, the approach that they take. They have the same challenges that someone else will have. How do they go about getting around those challenges or addressing them head on?
And with that attitude, essentially, right? It's just, hey man, it is what it is. Let's move on. Let's continue to build a quality product and put it out there. You know, it's the Tommy Boy adage with Pete Zielinski. You know, we build American products for the American people. Right?
Gosh darn it, Dennis still hasn't seen that, right? Tommy Boy.
No, I did.
Oh, you
after
did?
You mentioned it,
okay,
yeah.
good. We've been talking about it in the office, and Dennis is like,
every time we have a Tommy Boy adage, he's like, "What's
What?
that? Who is that? What is that?"
Yeah, Jen said, this is more of a movie for you and your guy friends.
What?
That's true. That's kind of true.
That's funny.
Good. Well, this has been interesting. I'm
Very interesting.
I'm intrigued by how this is going to move forward. You know,
Time will
like
tell.
you know, as far as you know, the day-to-day operations. If that, you know, the tariff gets lifted, when the tariff's going to get lifted, how that's going to apply to businesses, and
if this increase is enough for these companies to, you know, to stay in the U.S.
That's good information. Good.
Well, one thing I know is Americans aren't quitters.
That's true.
So,
nor are our guys.
Yeah, there's going to be a way through this, and it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds.
And I think our shops are pretty resilient when it comes to that type of change, part change. I mean, it's not like parts increases haven't happened before.
Exactly.
I mean, it has. Whether it was, you know, either the price of the metal went up, or the price of that went up, or there was a shortage here or a shortage there, or whatever the case is, or a business, you know, you had a plant that went down. I mean, we've dealt with those before. I think this is just a little different because I guess it's just mainstream media, and you know,
of course,
people are going to make whatever they're going to make of it. So, ooh. Can't wait to see more. This will be interesting. Well, good. Well, thank you for being here at the Transmission Coaching Podcast. It's a great day to fix transmissions. So let's keep fixing transmissions together. Until next time.